Here we go again with the groupthink mentality. Regardless if I am new or not, the scrutiny and antagonism brought onto me was unwarranted and unjustified, actually. I have
What?
done nothing.
Your
Yeah,
argument sucks because, and you also think that we're attacking your character as well. We just suspected you of being a person, and we're asking questions because you remain anonymous, so we can only wonder your identity.
with casual here chiming in with some vendetta against me. Well, why don't you shut me up? Eric can shut me up because he says things that make sense. Well, why don't you shut me up?
How do you differentiate an INFJ and ENFJ?
TE and TI, probably. TE polar or TE.
An INFJ and an ENFJ.
Yeah,
Disgusting, patronizing behavior. If you don't like it, then why do you spend so much time watching the videos?
Ash.
And
Wow, that's wrong.
Saren's video is supposedly infamous, which I bet nobody really gives a shit about that video because it was so super boring. And people who aren't familiar with the people in the channel are not going to give a shit about that video. But according to you, it's infamous when it's been buried by probably hundreds of videos by now.
Interesting.
Ash, INFJs are TE polar and SE suggestive, while ENFJs are SI polar and TI suggestive.
So how do you differentiate them?
Like, do you want something like for the behavior or something like that?
Yeah, for example, if you have, I don't know, she, how do you differentiate? How do you see whenever she literally is an ENFJ or an INFJ?
Well, for example, she is INFJ and Liz is ENFJ. You can just compare them.
Liz?
Yeah, the girl that comes here from Canada.
Oh, but I mean generally, how do you compare them?
So I believe that ENFJs are very good at taking initiative when it comes to making connections with people. Like if you'll notice Liz, I don't know if you've seen her around, but like immediately she sees a person that she likes, she'll ask to friend them on Facebook, make connections that way. She, if you notice her aura when she's in a group setting, the group tends to revolve around her. I mean that usually is a good indicator of someone being like an EJ type. For me, anyways. I'm sure you guys could probably argue that.
So the key difference is that oftenly INFJs are more in the background, talking on meaningful conversations, whilst on the other hand ENFJs try to bond with other people directly.
Yeah, sure. Something like that.
So if an ENFJ is within a group, they'll try to listen instead of speak and connect other people.
Wait, ask that again?
An ENFJ is more likely going to listen instead of speak.
You mean an INFJ is more likely or an ENFJ?
I mean that an ENFJ is more likely going to seek out social potential in interactions and situations. Like there'll be a lot of more social, right? Because I have a problem typing this one person. After going from ENTPs to ESFJs to ISTPs and whatever else has gone to my mind, I came to the conclusion that they're definitely NFJ, but now the final stone isn't there yet, and that's whenever it's introversion or extroversion, and it's like a few half year now since I was trying to type that person. But the thing is, I cannot see an ENFJ. So I think every single ENFJ or maybe some ISTPs and ESFPs I may have mistyped because I'm not used to those types. I couldn't type anyone those types. But right now it's just ENFJ. Like I know everybody. I know all the sentinels are of the. I have an example for every single sensor, every single analyst. Right? Those are easy, right? Even though I don't know many INTJs. But within diplomats, I can see whenever or not somebody is an INFP. But then there is like this super dark zone when I'm not sure of the type, and that's sometimes ENFP, from time to time INFJ, and I don't know if I've ever in my life encountered an ENFJ. So how do you type these three?
What type are you?
ENTP?
ENTP? Okay. Okay. You gotta, one way to do it is to know the relationship between your type and the other type and how they interact.
Yeah, but then I cannot type people from movies because they don't interact with me.
What?
You type the character from the movie or the person?
If you type people by your relation to them, you cannot type them until you interact with them. Therefore, you are limiting yourself.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily, because it's not about the interaction as much as, like, quote unquote, the vibe you get from them.
Yeah, but you start to rely on them. You start to rely on the system of relationship instead of actually knowing how to type people just from looking at them.
Yeah, but so it's another way of doing it. Like it's like you can go by functions, or you can go by that, and you have to go by both ways and have the same result. You know what I mean?
But if you learn to type one way, you often forget how to type the other. And I want something universal I can use whenever, however.
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, I think typing characters from movies is not a good way to learn how to type people. Because the actors have different types, and they just try to give a type to the character, and the character not necessarily has one type.
I know.
Yeah, it's not consistent with one type.
I know about that, and that may be why some types in movies are not entirely able to be nailed down. But if the writing is good, it's most likely an example of a certain archetype or friend of the writer, and that friend or archetype is influenced by real types that exist within reality.
Yeah,
I mean, you could do. I mean, I like watching interviews on YouTube just to get a feel for like what type of person may be, but I still can't. I mean, that's kind of.
So what was the question again, Ash?
How do you type INFJ, ENFJ, and ENFP? And most preferably, how do you distinguish an INFJ from an ENFJ? And even more preferably, how do you discover if a person is an ENFJ or not?
An ENFJ is SI polar. That's basically the thing. You can SI polar FE dom. So they will be like restless, like they can't chill. Imagine someone who's lazy. That's exactly not an ENFJ. ENFJ will never be like that.
They're incapable of relaxing.
Well, then I know an ENFJ.
And
I
also, yeah, go ahead.
like the girl I know, the person I'm trying to type for half a year. I've typed that person ENFJ, but at the same time, that person is rather quiet and involved within books rather than people some of the time. And they're rather listeners than they initiate conversations, but they're rather listeners instead of actual talkers.
But I don't think that's necessarily prove any of that's the fact that you I don't know what to say. Like that doesn't necessarily mean that they are ENFJ or that they necessarily are INFJ. Both type can do those things.
But like, if you consider the age category of that certain type, then they might try to develop their second function, as with me, and that is the I. And when ENFJ is trying to develop introverted intuition, I think it would make sense that they would listen more.
Yeah, but you just go with whether they are rational or irrational, like whether they have a dominant FE or dominant.
Or not.
Yeah, dominant FE or dominant NI. You know, whether they, for example, if they make a plan, do they change it, or if you try to make them change that plan, do they react aggressively and want to just do it anyways, or they have no problem just winging it, or
they might have a certain trait I see in dominant feelers, and that is like having a feeling FI or FE function as their dominant, and that is like obeying authority without question. So when the classroom is speaking, the F dominants dislike it, and the dominant FE is trying to shush everybody up.